which is quite nice, but be aware of that if you brought anything with you. In the unlikely event of a fire, we will follow the officers who will escort us out of the building. Please do not use the lift. And also tonight, photos may be taken, and please raise your hand if you don't want to be photographed. Okay, one, thank you. So thank you everyone for coming, and welcome also to our online participants. Just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Helen Cook. I'm co-founder and director of the Resilience Web CIC. Resilience Web is an online visualization of environmental and social justice community groups in Cambridge, curated by the people who live here. Further, we have nearly a dozen webs across the UK, each of which is specific to its place. These webs enable volunteers to find groups and for groups to find each other around issues they care about. We also host events like these to connect people in person and to understand the issues around resilience. At one of these events at the Cambridge Room, I met Katie Thornborough. Katie and I started talking and wanted to look in detail into resilience in Cambridge. And so How Resilient is Cambridge, this series was born. The Cambridge Room aims to be the voice of Cambridge citizens on policy issues and is now open again in the Grafton Centre if you'd like to visit it. So we are here on a ridiculously warm February day, one of the few days this month that it hasn't rained, to talk about flooding. The past 3 years have been the three warmest since 1850, and it's clear that we're heading into an increasingly uncertain future. With this series of events, we want to start a public conversation about adaptation and resilience to really understand the issues we're facing. Resilience often means bouncing back after a disaster. But more than this, we want to look at what can be done in advance to prevent disasters. How Resilient is Cambridge aims to understand the issues so we can anticipate what changes might happen and not be surprised by them. And we're doing this in a context where we know the needs of all people are not currently being met. It's not just future problems that are of concern. Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities in the UK, and for many, the disasters are already in progress. Resilience doesn't necessarily mean optimization or removing all slack in a system. It requires alternatives and backups. It means being adaptable. Resilience is only possible through understanding root causes, feedback loops, and systems, valuing the marginal and the marginalized. The more ways we have of meeting a need, and the more ways we have of working together, the stronger we'll be together as a community. We survive and thrive together, not, as some may think, as isolated individuals preparing for disaster on our own at home, but as a community that insists on a better future for all. The focus tonight is on understanding the issues, the risks and challenges we face. This is a discussion of the issues, not of politics, and we aim to keep the focus on facts. We will have problems to solve, and we'll hear from our experts about them shortly. But I hope you'll leave tonight with a better understanding of the issues, as gaining this knowledge is the first step towards starting to think about solutions that work. Further, be encouraged by the fact that we have filled this room and our online space with people who care. Now, just before we turn to the topic for tonight, flooding, I will explain our timing scheme. So Peter has our timer. It will be green when you start, turn yellow at 1 minute, and turn red when your time's up. Okay. We have invited a fantastic panel of experts to speak to us today. Each will have 10 minutes to speak. First up is JJ Waters, Associate Landscape Architect at LDA Design. Over to you, JJ.
Does that work? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Katie. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about a topic that we care deeply about as landscape architects. As Helen said, I am an associate landscape architect for a company called LDA Design. And I work in our Cambridge studio, so I'm a Cambridge resident, and I wanted today to look at a cause and effect framework for flooding and water stress within Cambridge, and then talk through some case studies that we've delivered that kind of illustrate how flood resilience can also result in a landscape for people and for nature. So I'm just going to share my screen. Control. Okay. I wanted to touch first on how important water is to Cambridge and how its natural heritage is embedded in the presence of watery landscapes. The Fens is a distinctive, historic and human-influenced wetland landscape. Its level, open topography shapes the impression of huge skies which convey a strong sense of place, tranquility and inspiration. The Fens are a very special kind of wetland habitat, supporting an exceptional diversity of wildlife, including endangered and unique species. Cambridge's chalk streams form another incredibly important piece of its landscape. They are among the world's rarest freshwater habitats, cool, mineral-rich waters born from the chalk aquifer. Both of these valuable and important habitats define this area. The flora and fauna they sustain, create rich ecologies that are fundamental to Cambridge's identity. Water has also played a key role culturally in the area. The city of Cambridge is established around the river, which has supported its growth and formation. The river has always been central to life in Cambridge, from facilitating trade and transport to modern-day recreational punting and college rowing. The history of Hobson's Conduit, bringing clean drinking water to the centre of the town in the 1600s, and the growth of the university colleges along the backs, all strengthen its connection to the River Cam. The Fens also has a rich cultural heritage, where its inhabitants lived in harmony with the natural landscape and seasonal flooding. When the Fens were eventually drained, the landscape and life within it was drastically altered. And so I think it's fair to say that Cambridge is of water, and for us to build resilience, we need to work with these natural processes and cultural identities. So we've approached this presentation today by looking at a kind of framework through a cause and effect framework. It's not an exhaustive process, but it allows us to frame some of the drivers that are causing the change and start to look at how we can respond to them so they essentially build resilience within our landscapes. The two drivers I want to focus on today are the city's growth. We all know that Cambridge is under huge pressure at the moment and that the projected growth is going to put more pressure on our chalk streams, on our habitats. And climate change as well is a key driver in that change. So we're experiencing, not only are we experiencing much hotter summers, we're experiencing wetter winters. In terms of the actions that are caused by these key drivers, increased growth is going to increase abstraction from our chalk aquifers. So there's already a lot of pressure on our aquifers. Cambridge gets the majority of its drinking water from the aquifers, and this growth is going to increase the pressure on them. Pollution as well is another action caused by the city's growth through water runoff, increased wastewater, and more pressure on the river. And then climate change. So as I said, we're experiencing dry summers and wetter winters. I think Anne's going to talk more about that in her talk. So in terms of the pressures, our rare chalk streams, our biodiversity are all under pressure from these drivers. There's increased flooding risks. Our existing drainage infrastructure is under pressure, and the resilience of our drinking water supply is also under pressure. So how do we build resilience? How do we respond to this in our landscape, build resilience, help nature recovery to support sustainable growth? And what I wanted to do today was go through 4 case studies that start to illustrate how landscape can build resilience, as well as creating biodiversity and lovely places for people to spend time in. So the first project I want to talk about is the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So this is a project that we've been involved in as a practice for over 20 years now. We were appointed in 2006 as part of the master plan team for the 2012 Olympic Games delivery. The site, when we started work, was incredibly polluted. It had suffered from heavy industrial use and urban neglect for almost a century. And the River Lee, which ran through it, was devoid of biodiversity. It had been canalized, and the kind of physical and visual access to it was completely cut off. So this was a hugely significant project for us, and set the benchmark for a 21st century exemplar of a sustainable environment. The concept was very simple. We wanted to put the river back at the center of the park and create a focal point, make that part of the design. So it became more visible and accessible, but also became more natural and biodiverse. So we spent a lot of work reprofiling the riverbanks to maximize space and encourage access. We worked very hard looking at how people access the river both visually and physically. Land was sculpted to allow people to visually connect to the river system. And we wanted to create the river, we wanted to make the river a habitat resource. So we worked with this wetland habitat to create wetland habitat, so wet woodland meadows and fish ponds. And then the park itself became an integrated water management system, and it was used to take up flood capacity. So we created lots of amazing new wetland habitats. So these are some of the fish ponds that we created during construction. And the whole park was designed to be flooded at the lower level. So you can see here, this is the River Lee. You can see how naturalized it's become, and the way we designed the circulation and the kind of the movement hierarchy through the park allowed for the whole lower section to be flooded during storm events. So the result 20 years on is this incredibly biodiverse park that is for people and for nature. So it has great access. The kind of legacy of the Olympics is still going strong, where the kind of the residential and all the other kind of uses that are now tying into this park have been very successful. I think one of the really interesting things about this project is the impact it had on flooding, lowered further downstream. So you can see the Olympic Park here. So this is a 1 in 100 year flood map in 2006, and you can see the impact it had in 2012. So this is just from the Olympic Park. So this is I think it was something like 5,000 homes it removed from the flood zone. So that's a really nice kind of example of how this landscape, which was designed to be a habitat resource and also a flood management system, the kind of impact it can have further downstream. Second project I want to talk about is the Lee Valley Ice Centre. So the Lee Valley Ice Centre is within a wetland landscape. It sits beside the River Lee. It's just kind of outside of this picture here. Which is a very significant green corridor within London. It's adjacent to Walthamstow Marshes, which is a SSSI site. So it's one of London's last floodplain grasslands. So the context of the site was very much a watery context, if you want. The ice centre was a 1980s ice centre, incredibly inefficient in terms of its energy use, and then the kind of surrounding landscape was it was all hard landscape, all contributed to surface water runoff and kind of devoid of biodiversity. One of the kind of the really interesting parts about this project and the kind of key bits of innovation, which I think is is important when we think about resilience is innovation, and kind of embracing innovation is ice rinks. I don't know if I didn't know this. They have to scrape off the top layer of ice fairly regularly. They're doing it 2 or 3 times a day, and as a result, you get a lot of waste ice, which normally just gets flushed down into the drains. Or it ends up in the sewer system. So you have these ice rinks producing vast amounts of ice every day that just ends up in the sewer. So as part of our proposal, we developed with the engineers, we developed a series of constructed wetlands that recycled the ice water. So the idea was that the ice would get scraped off, it would start its journey in this constructed wetland at the back of the site, and through natural processes. No way. About 10 minutes already. Okay. Yes, I will. Sorry. So yeah, incredible project. The constructed wetlands have an exciting functional purpose. So they clean and water ends up back in the river. They have a really nice educational purpose, and they allow people to kind of experience this wetland ecology as part of their daily lives. Lots of swales, and then as a result, this Oxbow Lake, which is part of the River Lee, the kind of its oxygenation and its the biodiversity is increased, and they've had lots of they've had otters and stuff coming back, which is great. Mill Bay Boulevard is a less exciting example, but it's quite a nice example as it's a SUDS retrofit project, and it's interesting because of the kind of high level of engineering that went into it. So we won this project in Portsmouth with the Water Resilient Cities Partnership Project, which is an EU initiative. And I guess the key thing to say here is that the underground storage tanks were capable of storing 240 tons of water. So it was a huge amount of water stored underground in a very constrained site. You can see in this section here. This is just a section through the road, but you can see the kind of level of storage underneath. And then finally, Sighthill Glasgow was a project we just delivered up in Scotland. It's a lot to say about it. I'm trying to think what the key thing to say is. 20 hectares of wetland and parkland. And I guess one of the really interesting things here is the drainage infrastructure has been delivered first before any of the housing, and it's been so successful that it has unlocked more development, and it is now part of a more kind of strategic SUD system within the area. Yeah, so you can see the kind of complexity of wetlands, and then the idea was that as you moved into the more urban areas, the wetlands become more kind of engineered and kind of more refined. And then the final thing to say as well, which is interesting, is that we worked really hard with Scottish Water to minimise any fences to the wetlands. So usually you would have fences all the way around these wetlands from a kind of health and safety perspective. We worked very hard to avoid that, so people could kind of interact with the ecology and interact with the wetlands. And as a result, you can see here, it was only kind of on the main kind of corners and cycleways that we had to have fences, and the site becomes very open and very permeable, and allows people to experience that ecology. Thank you.
Thanks, JJ, for sharing those really interesting projects with us. Next up, we have Anne Miller, Chair of Carbon Neutral Cambridge.
Good, thank you very much. I'm Anne Miller, I'm Chair of Carbon Neutral Cambridge. And as you might expect, we aim to accelerate the decarbonisation of Greater Cambridge. I perhaps also add I'm co-chair of Cam Valley Forum, so there's a sort of intersection of interest about water and flooding. So, I'm going to, as JJ has pointed out, I mean, flood risk is an important issue at the moment, and growth is likely to make it worse in Cambridge. But so is climate change. So I'm going to focus on the climate change impacts as what's coming down the track in addition to the challenges of growth and the challenges that we already have. So in essence, there's three sources of flood risk. There's extreme rainfall, there's the overflowing rivers, and there's sea level rise. Climate change is making all three worse. And so this photograph here is one that my husband took in 2001 of Riverside in Cambridge. And okay, we've invested in flood defences for that, so hopefully the poor folks there aren't going to have the river cam in their houses again soon, but we shall see. So the basic problem is that Cambridge's winters are getting wetter. Met Office collates data at NIAB, National Institute of Agricultural Botany, off Huntington Road, and has done so since the 1960s. And I downloaded their data on rainfall. And if you plot the winter rainfall, deeming that winter is September to February, it's increased by 30% since the 60s. And of course, the other thing that's happening is the extreme rainfall. It's coming harder and more intense. So that rainfall tends to arrive more suddenly, which makes it much harder for it to run away. And so the worst winter, let's go back one, you can see that the worst example is actually here. And that was 23-24. And many of us will remember there was just enormous lakes across the street. The drains were just completely jammed and overwhelmed. Jumping up and down, wanting the county council to be faster and at clearing the street drains, because it's a serious risk if we don't. In 2015, I think it was, Addenbrooke's came within that far of having its entire power supply flooded through flooding at the Rosie. They've since done a lot of work on adding drainage, adding pumps, and it's unlikely to happen again, but they could have lost all power throughout the entire hospital within about that much. So these can have really serious consequences. This is what you see here is water on Fen Causeway, but it can get much, much less pleasant. The water leaks into the sewage system through cracks in the pipes, and then the sewage systems get overwhelmed. And so what you see here is Button End, Harston, and these puddles are not rain, which is what people driving through thought it was, what kids thought it was. It's dilute sewage. You can just about see it's bubbling up through the manhole covers. So kids were in their wellies playing in this, and cars were driving through at speed, and it's actually sewage. That's what happens when we get overwhelming quantities of groundwater. As I say, it seeks into all the cracks in the pipes, and then comes out into our systems. So we're already today at high risk of surface water flooding. So this is the Environment Agency's map, 1% annual risk of surface water flooding. And if I just zoom in a bit, I'm sorry, I'm not going to zoom in a bit. You can maybe see that here's Cambridge Station, and this area round sort of heading out towards Cherry Hinton, all the stuff to the east of Cambridge Station is at real risk of getting surface water flooding from rain, which happens very suddenly. So I hope Clara is going to tell us all what to do about it, because the Environment Agency does warn that people expect the agencies to be able to fix it, but actually they can't do very much other than the odd sandbag. So we have to rely on ourselves. Of course, we also have flood risk from the rivers. And this is, again, is the Environment Agency map. And I've zoomed in a bit on the area around Cambridge North. You can see here's the river. Dark stuff is 1 in 30 chance of flooding in any 1 year. The pink stuff is what climate change is going to make worse. And the problem is that the flooding actually then can overwhelm critical infrastructure, rail, roads, water treatment, gas, electric, emergency services, hospitals. So you get these cascading problems which rapidly unravel and become really, really, very quite difficult. And then sea level. I don't want to depress everybody, but sea level rise has already risen 20 centimeters and it's accelerating. People tend to say, oh, well, how much will it be? Well, probably maybe at least another 50 centimeters by 2100 into the century. Could be a meter. Could be quite a lot. As people at British Antarctic Survey and others are working on, there's concern about instabilities in some of the glacier systems. So it could be a lot higher. And the other thing about sea level rise is that some of it is just due to the heat warming up the water and the water expands. So it actually carries on after 2100, even if we stop emitting carbon emissions. Pigeons will come home to roost. And in the latest Committee on Climate Change report, they warn that, quote, global mean sea level rise in excess of 15 meters by cannot be ruled out. Well, where I live in Cambridge, it's 8 meters above sea level. Those of us who live in the north of Cambridge, it's a lot less than that. So we have really, really serious problems. And of course, you know, okay, at the moment, we're a nice long way from the sea, not a problem. And but this map is quite fun. It's from a website called coastal.climatecentral.org. And this shows what the map of the UK would look like with 2 degrees of warming or 3 degrees of warming. And I should say this actually assumes that flood defences have been overwhelmed. And so, as you can see, this used to be the Fens. And here's Peterborough, and here's Cambridge. And we are now very much Cambridge on sea. So what that says is the flood defences in the Fens are absolutely critical to the well-being of Cambridge. And it's kind of easy for us to sort of ignore it and assume it's just that flat land with a few cabbages growing in it. But the Environment Agency is really quite seriously worried about this. So I don't know how many of us have actually ever been there, but Denver Sluice is out towards King's Lynn, and it controls the flow of the tide coming in and lets the river out into the wash. As the Environment Agency say, the Denver Sluice complex in the Great Ouse is critical for controlling water across the catchment, and it affects the security of King's Lynn and incidentally Cambridge. All structures at the site need to be modernised with better capability to monitor what's happening across the catchment in real time. They also, in the same report, warn that in the absence of significant investment, flood risk increases rapidly, brackets 16-fold by the 2080s. And in addition to the risk of potentially catastrophic failure at Denver Sluice, there's also, I think they estimated about 300 kilometres of embankments along the Fens that also urgently need work to repair them. So it can all be done. It's expensive. But then there will also always be questions about, well, should the Environment Agency prioritise flood defences in the Fens, or should it prioritise improving the Thames barrier to protect central London, which faces similar threats? I'm going to be giving you a bit of a challenge to deal with, Clara.
I think you've set me up.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, so as advertised, next, Clara Todd, co-founder of Water Sensitive Cambridge.
Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks very much, Anne, for setting me up beautifully and touched on some of the themes that I will be covering in my talk. So yes, my name is Clara Todd. I'm from Water Sensitive Cambridge. It's a community interest company, and we are radically working in a grassroots way, changing people's relationship with water. water. We're building rain gardens. We're doing a lot of the community suds, this small scale suds, very much at a different scale to JJ and the LDA. But we think that they are effective, and we need many different approaches in this polycrisis. So let me just get my slides up. So yes, thank you very much for queuing me up. Let me just get my slides. Okay, so next slide, please. So, is flooding happening in Cambridge? Yes, yes, it is. It happens very in localized places. This is a wet spot in East Chesterton. Surface water flooding happens very quickly. It often affects just a very, very small number of people. Sometimes it's just surface water flooding on a junction, and gets in people's way. They drive through it. It comes and goes quickly, and then it's gone, and what you're left with is a slick of mud. This is a place like that. This isn't the only place in Cambridge that's affected by surface water flooding, but this started water sensitive Cambridge and our journey into community suds. We have a brilliant little project here, the Fallowfield Rain Gardens. If you find us on the website, find our website, you can find where it is. It doesn't look very much right now, but it is green infrastructure, and it's doing some hard work. So next slide, please. So I'm going to concentrate on surface water flooding. Yes, we have a river running through our town. The levels are controlled up to a certain extent by Denver Sluice and other management and weirs and things like that. But surface water flooding can happen quite far away from the river. And it occurs when there is intense rainfall, which overwhelms the drainage systems and the ground's capacity to hold the water. So yes, climate change is very, very important. Climate change basically means water change. We are changing the climate and the way that water moves around the place. Yeah, we're modifying the water cycle in a lot of the things that we're doing, not just with climate change. But there are other modifiers and other things that increase risk. It's more likely when the ground is covered in impermeable surfaces, if the ground is compacted or waterlogged, there is less places for the water to go. But it is also a lot more likely when the road gullies, drains and sewers are blocked. It can happen very fast, and it can go away just as quick, and often a very small geographical area. Next slide, please. Oh no, that's the right slide. Yeah, carry on. So here we are. Yeah, so here are some of the things that you probably are familiar in Cambridge where you live. So very much working at a different scale. You know, we're not designers, but we're observing and we're moving around, and we care very much about Cambridge and our resilience. So yeah, the first screen, you'll see this, you might even have this in your own house, terrace house in Cambridge, more often than not will drain out into the street. The surface water, the gutters, the downpipes will just go into a little gully under the pavement and then spill out into the street. So that's not going to help the amount of water that's collecting in one area. We also have in the middle, you can see a blocked gully. So this is in West Chesterton. You might see it. I've seen them all over Cambridge. We have a gully pot that is not in use. It's full of sand, silt, and compacted leaf litter, and it's basically out of commission. It's probably not going to happen. Luckily enough, there is redundancy in the system and a lot of drains, but the drains can fail and fail for a long time before anybody notices. And then on the right-hand side, there are obstructions in pipes. There's tree roots, silt and litter in our drains. That will also be impacting the surface water. So we are not just talking about climate change, but climate change as a modifier in a complicated system that makes us more at risk for surface water flooding. Next slide, please. So also impermeable surfaces. So funnily enough, as more of us transition over to electric cars, it might be a driver to lose more front gardens. We want a charge point in our house. So what would a rational person do? It makes perfect sense. You would cement over your front area so you could park close to your car. Developments will also impact. So Cambridge North on the right-hand side, one of my key documents that I looked at that I'll show you later on was the surface water management plan for North Cambridge. So on the top, you can see what it was a few years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and then what it is now. Next slide, please. So a wet spot. So this was a term, as I was researching, this was a term that came up a lot. Wet spot is a recurring, localized, and often chronic area of standing water or flooding. So a place that floods frequently. There are 3 high priority ones, and this was from 2011. I haven't found any more recent material for this, but King's Hedges and Arbory, Cherry Hinton and Coleridge, and North Chesterton are 3 of the top ones. If you can, all of these documents are available online, and they make very good reading. On the right-hand side, so Arbory has flooded in the past. So this was from the 1970s. These kids are having a whale of a time splashing around in the floodwater. So this is Campkin Road, and it's miles away from the river. And there are other places that are like this. So next slide, please. So one kind of flooding that Anne talked about a little bit, but sewage. So there is a 4th type of flooding, sewer flooding. So they can be caused by blockages in the sewers after heavy and continued rainfall and damage and system failure. In Cambridge, it's sort of the central parts of Cambridge that are often reliant on CSOs. There are certain parts of Cambridge that are reliant on CSOs. And so, this is a little bit worrying. So the rainfall, when climate change is impacting the rainfall patterns, and all of that rain, or a lot of that rain is going into the same pipes that carry sewers, then there is a risk of failure there. Incidentally, this is why there is sewage in our rivers, and often gets kind of lost out the talking about sewage spills. It's often to protect property, because a sewage flooding is very, very unpleasant. So it's also worth saying that even if it's not directly, the flooding isn't directly from the sewers, there's usually an aspect of sewage flooding in all the other types of flooding. So if you have flooding from the river, there is going to be sewage in the river. If you're flooding from groundwater, there is going to be sewage coming up, and surface water flooding. It basically means the pipes and the infrastructures will carrying the sewers will also be overwhelmed some of the time. So what can we do about this very, very unpleasant aspect of flooding? And from a lot of reports, is probably the most harrowing and shocking kind of recovery and resilience from flooding. So next slide, please. So here is a fix, since I've I think that this is probably a very, very good idea if you are in a place and you're worried at all about flooding. I'm probably going to get one of these, is getting a non-return valve on your sewage pipe. So basically, most homes in the UK are vulnerable to the backflow under any flood conditions. So this is a device that just prevents the foul water from the waste pipes coming back into your house. So it costs about £1,000 to install, but it can save a lot of kind of anguish. Okay, so next slide, please. So just before I move on to the next bit, talking about kind of some terminology, flood resilience is reducing the impact of water if water gets inside your property. Flood resistance is reducing the risk of water getting in there in the first place. Next slide, please. So concentrating on property level flood resilience and resistance. There are lots of people that are already living with flooding, and yes, it can be shocking, but there are many ways of coping. These are 3 resources that I found that were very useful. Flood Mary, she's somebody who has, she's an advocate for the flooded, and she has really been sort of campaigning and getting the message out there, particularly about property level flood resilience. So here are just some of them. You know, this is great. You can see air brick covers are probably something that you should all be doing too. You can get these sort of temporary little blocks if you are in an area that you think might get flooded. The water can come under the doors, through the air bricks, under the floors, all kinds of things. So, you know, there are things that you can do. Covering the air bricks is a really good thing. Getting one of those anti-return valves is also good. There are various things ranging from the very cheap to the very expensive. You can invest in flood barriers, but you know, maybe just first off, move your valuables up to your top floor. Have a safe place, not on the ground floor, for your beloved photo albums. You know, those things that are irreplaceable. That will help build resilience. You can also do things like invest in these little kind of inflatable, they're not sandbags, but they're kind of little sausages that when water, you lay them down in front of your door, and when water hits them, then they'll start expanding and create a seal. Yeah, so there are lots of things that you can do. Next slide, please. 1 more minute. So also make a flood plan. Just writing things down will give you a sense of control. Talk to your neighbors. Sign up to receive flood alerts and warnings, and understand what they mean. And yeah, so there are lots of things that you can do. You know, make a flood kit for yourself. Put all your documents in a safe place away from the ground floor. Think about what you would do if you needed to evacuate. Know how to turn off your gas and your services if water came into your house and you needed to do it quickly. So next slide. So getting back to sort of slightly less catastrophic, I just want to kind of end on like, well, okay, so how can we be more resilient to flooding, working with nature? And can we give water a safe place to go in Cambridge? There are places that will be impacted by flooding. How do we make it less horrible for everyone, or reduce the risk entirely? We go to the next slide. So these are just some ideas. We think that when the water comes, when the rainfall comes, we shouldn't be draining it. We shouldn't be kind of collecting it and pretending that it's a waste. We need to slow spread and sink water when it comes. And how do you do that? Well, you work with nature. Nature, green spaces, trees, these are all things that need water. And if you have more spaces around, there are more places for water to go, less places for it to collect. We can support the water cycle by planting well. We do need grey infrastructure, and our drains do need fixing, but we also need green infrastructure, and we need to work with nature. Next slide quickly, because I think this is important. So for is a more proactive approach to flood resilience. Yes, there are some very important players locally. We have the Cambridge County Council, they're the local flood authority, but they have the Cambridge City Council who look after awarded watercourses within the city. And the first main drain and some of that essential invisible infrastructure that keeps us safe. We have Anglian Water that looks after our sewers and the surface drains. We have the river camp, the camp conservators who manage the locks into various degrees of success. We have the Environment Agency that also is kind of overseeing a flood. But we also, on the right-hand side, you'll see all of these hardworking people that are making the fens less wet. We are on an edge, at the edge of the fens, a very wet place that is actively managed. We have drainage boards, and we have 10 of them that are kind of based near Ely in Prickwillow. It's very important and very interesting to go and see that. But we also need to be aware that we can't just let other people like, oh, somebody else is going to fix it. We need to report things, we need to observe, we need to connect and keep ourselves safe. We are in the context and we are caretakers as well as citizens. So thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Clara, and thank you to all our speakers for all the information that you've given us tonight. So we are writing a report summarizing everything that you've heard tonight and in the other events that we're doing as well. This report will be presented on May 28th, and it will be an opportunity for you to review all the information that, that folks have given us. So we have several people around taking notes tonight. If you would like to join them and help contribute to the report, then please get in touch with me or Katie after the event. So with us tonight also, we have several members of local government. And I will introduce you and you'll have 3 minutes to either summarize what you've heard or to ask a question that fills in the gaps in your knowledge. So let's start with Councillor Richard Swift of West Chesterton Ward. And
thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, once again, very, very interesting set of speakers. And going to each of these Cambridge Resilience conferences, I don't know what the title will be, has been extremely interesting. First one was on food sustainability. Second one was on circular economy, and now this one on flooding, which has been, they've all been absolutely superb. And I very much recommend members of the public come to all of the future ones. So this one, JJ Waters, is that how you pronounce her name? Waters, okay. Yes, I was particularly interested in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park because 2 of my children live in Walthamstow and they visit the Wetlands National Park place, ducks and things. And they've had direct effect of flooding in nearby streets, not their streets. One of the things I was interested in, I was particularly impressed by the wetland habitat redevelopment in the Olympic Village, and how is it that you've managed to get such a sort of renaissance of plant growth and biodiversity when the river is coming, the River Lee, which I lived in the East End of London in Tower Hamlets 15 years in the last century. The River Lee has always been a sort of really bad place for wildlife. How do you actually get biodiversity improvements when the water is flowing through the actual wetland park? That's one question. Because we have a similar problem with the River Cam. River Cam, for example, in Trumpington, with the public swimming area, and the ridiculousness of having a public swimming area when there's sewage flowing all the way through the public swimming area. So it doesn't matter if you make the actual swimming area clean, it will never actually work because the water is coming through. So that was something I'd like to ask you about. Maybe I've got a couple other things for the other people. Can I just go on to all of them? Then with Anne, yes, I was particularly interested about what you had to say about Cambridge and the flooding over the rain flooding. And the thing I was curious about was why Cherry Hinton, which isn't near the River Cam as far as I know, why that is by far the worst area to be affected by flooding. It's because it doesn't seem to be particularly low. It doesn't seem to be particularly have any rivulets coming into it, and yet it seems to be the one area that is absolutely diabolical as far as future risk of flooding. So that was something I'd like to ask you specifically. And then Clara, Todd, what on earth can we do about hard surfaces on front gardens? I mean, in West Chesterton, everyone's got a front. Well, most people have got front gardens, and in my road, Guildhall Road, everywhere that has got hard surfaces, actually you see in the rainstorm the water coming down the middle of either side of the camber and flooding into everyone's the pavements and everything. Is there an education programme? Whose responsibility is it? Presumably it's the county council because they're in charge of roads and pavements. But what can we do to actually encourage people not to concrete over their front gardens and instead actually do the decent thing and keep some of your front garden rather than devoting it to car parking? And of course, how does that relate to residence parking and all of those sorts of problems? So it's a big issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question. So I think on the Olympic Park itself, the river, I guess that is a problem with rivers, is that water moves, doesn't stay in one place. So I think, you can only treat what you can in your site. We did a lot of work on reprofiling the river edge, so widening it and working with topography to create different areas that held water for longer, bits that would flood and hold water, bits that would stay wet for longer, bits that would dry out quicker. And we also looked at renaturalizing it as well, so introducing more curves and a more natural profile to it, which helps slow down water, and that's part of the solution is slowing the flow. We work closely with ecologists, so in terms of the kind of biodiversity and the habitats we're looking to create, we work closely with ecologists and the kind of local biodiversity action plan and the priority habitats and species to make sure that we've created these quite niche habitats within the river edge. And again, plant species was a fundamental part of that. So I think in that last image of the Olympic Park, you can see how successful the reed beds were, and reeds are great at removing pollutants from water. So it's a combination of things, but it's really trying to renaturalize it as much as possible and introducing those plant species that help with pollution. The interesting thing about the ice centre project, which was also on the River Lee, was that the water that we ended up discharging back into the river, into the Oxbow Lake, once it had been through all the wetlands and all the filter beds, it helped in oxygenating the river. So it was this really kind of clean oxygenated water being fed into the river, and in turn helped oxygenate the Oxbow Lake. So that was the main kind of driver for the biodiversity.
And Thanks, Richard. Turning to your questions. Perhaps the first thing, you made a comment about the public swimming area at Trumpington, which I assume you mean the Sheep's Green. And there's a bit of a myth that, well, there's no point cleaning up Sheep's Green because the water comes through it. Well, that's precisely the point. So the whole point of doing it, and I'm speaking here with a Cam Valley Forum hat on, because you may remember we put the application in with the support of the City Council, for which we're very grateful, was to actually, by having a bathing water designation downstream of the sewage works, it puts a statutory obligation on the water company to clean up the source of the sewage works. So Hasingfield sewage works is definitely a big source. One of our people yesterday actually saw, not only was it overflowing, which we get the data point, it is slightly, it's kind of diluted with a bit of rainfall, but it's still overflowing. But there was also a leak. You don't quite know where from, but one of the little ditches beside it said you could hear the little waterfall coming through it. So we're putting pressure on Anglian Water. They're actually being very responsive. They had originally budgeted 5 million quid for improvements, assuming that it got bathing water designation. Nothing if it didn't. And I think it's now gone up to about 10 or 20 million to clean up Hasingfield. So absolutely that point, you can't just clean up the site where people swim. You need to look at where the stuff's coming from. And that's the program that's going on at the moment. And so turning to the second point about why is the Cherry Hinton Coleridge area so much of a surface water flood area? I don't know. But one of the reasons why Cambridge itself is so much at risk of surface flooding is because it's pretty flat. If you're on a hill, that's okay. It rushes down elsewhere unless you happen to be at the bottom of the hill. So I'm told that one of the reasons Cambridge has particular problems is because it's quite flat. So maybe they just change that area is actually flatter and maybe very slightly dipped. I don't know. Or maybe the drains are spectacularly blocked there. Could be. And actually, I should also say, the east of England is itself at particular risk in the UK for getting extreme rainfall, I think. And so there was a study done by the university a few years ago.
Hello. Yeah, so I think thank you very much for your question. But I think as just following on Cherry Hinton, that there's the last surface water management plan document that I found was from 2011, and it does say explicitly about Cherry Hinton, and it could be it's a mix of geology and the gradient. One of the our local chalk springs are there, so there would be groundwater being pushed through the chalk. Chalk is porous, but it also takes a long time for water to percolate. There's also been a lot of development, but this is like 2011 when this report was happened. So there's new information too that needs to be added to it, and I'd love to see that document change. But yeah, it's a great place to start. Okay, on to Gilbert Road. Actually, Yeah and I, my colleague over there, we have a fantasy about doing rain gardens in Gilbert Road. We've engaged with one of the residents there who would be overjoyed. There's lots of green spaces. Yes, people have front gardens, but there is also a verge. One of the things that we love to do is retrofitting rain gardens onto ordinary grass verges. A few months ago, we noticed that there were some tree plantings, like 2 or 3 tree plants there. Looks beautiful, very, very nice. But wouldn't it be wonderful if with every tree planting, there was a policy of where the water was coming from? If you saw things, not just in a single, let's put a tree there to create more canopy cover, but if you thought of it as your green infrastructure, as your how you drained an area. Each tree plant, and I've talked to a tree officer, needs to be supported by both after it's been planted, before the roots get established and it gets access to good groundwater. But what would it be like if with every tree that was planted, there was a little rain garden. If we thought about, okay, we can do a little curb cut, we can create a place for water to collect and seep into the ground. Wouldn't that be wonderful? We could be such a brilliant council in kind of really innovating these kind of multi-factor, multi-benefit solutions. So that's what I would love.
Just a very quick, with the tarmacked area where Milton Road School was, the idea is to actually stop sort of aerials and fans and Wi-Fi boxes by actually reclaiming it, and then eventually, as part of the plan, to actually regreen the whole lot to what it was back in the 1930s. This is just the first stage to stop developments. So there is a plan behind just those 3 trees.
Okay, moving on. Next, we have Councillor Katie Porter.
Thank you very much. Again, really interesting, if slightly scary at times. I mean, I sit on various planning committees, as does KTT. I'm quite interested in the drainage first approach. We do a lot about master planning with green infrastructure first to try and establish those trees. But I'd be really interested if you've got any ideas as to how we can kind of push that, because it is really important. And, you know, the more we build, which we do need to in Cambridge, we need the houses, but we need them to be sustainable. And you look at some of the design codes we've got, land north of Cherry Hinton is, in my opinion, very impressive in terms of the trees, the space, the root protection areas, and just trying to manage that sustainable urban drainage. Interesting about the not fencing, because I think we've had a little bit of pushback occasionally where we put in sustainable urban drainage, where it is meant to flood occasionally, but then there's a concern about how's that managed, the safety, are kids playing in it. So again, I suppose there's an education piece there. And I think I'm always surprised about how many people think it's a massive problem when a floodplain floods. Well, because obviously you look out and you think, oh my goodness, obviously not for Riverside, that's less good. But you know, if Midsummer Common is flooding, that's kind of what it's meant to do, because the other option is the city is flooding. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we can let people know that. And I think Katie and I sit on various planning committees. We see a lot of exemplars coming forward for the big office and labs, you know, sustainable urban drainage, managing it on site, particularly with the foul water issues we've got with Hartree not coming forward at the moment, where we are really expecting developers to look after their own water coming over the site, recycling it, grey water, blue water, using it to water the plants, retention tanks to stop it flooding out. I think for residential, it's slightly more challenging. I mean, I'm a great fan of things. Is it greencrete? So in effect, if you do want to park a car on your drive, you don't tarmac it. You have it's like little concrete, like I describe it like a stepping stones, and so that it still drains. I don't know if you've got any ideas about what we can do, and things like artificial grass. You know, for my garden, I've got a tiny little garden in the city centre, and we lifted the patio, and it's now grass, and you can see the difference when it rains because it does actually drain away. And things like water butts. We're big fans of putting water butts on balconies and everywhere because it holds the water. And I really like the idea of rain gardens as well. So I suppose what I would be interested in sort of your ideas as how we can get people more aware of that. So I completely understand if you're living in a house in Cambridge, you want to park your car or even your cargo bike, your first thought is I'll just concrete it over. I don't think there's an awareness necessary that leads to the water rushing off and then blocking the drains and then flooding the roads. So it's almost that invest now to save later, isn't it? Like some of the big structural projects, like the barriers you were talking about, but also those little things about a little bit more money spent getting it right the first time means your house probably isn't going to flood later. So yeah, that's what's making me think, and making me think from a planning perspective, for sure Katie's as well, what we need to be talking about when we, you know, have pre-applications developers about what they can do to try and build that in so that we're not concreting over things that don't need to be like that. Thank you.
I can answer. Well, I can try and answer the question about the infrastructure first approach. So we worked. It was with. So this was up in Glasgow. So we were working with Glasgow City Council, and they're called transformational regeneration areas, TRAs. But they had identified a series of TRAs around the city to support the growth. Sighthill was one of them. And as part of that kind of initial study and the kind of landscape master plan we developed, the kind of drainage was identified as a key thing to unlocking the housing. So that was delivered first. But I know it's then gone on. It evolved as we worked on the project. But I think it's then gone on to form part of the wider Metropolitan Glasgow Strategic Drainage Partnership Vision, the MGSDP. And it's a very complex flood system that collects all the surface water drainage from around the plots and feeds it through a series of more kind of natural swales and wetlands, and as it comes closer to the kind of urban environment, it becomes more formal and more engineered. And it also uses it's right beside the Clyde canal system as well. So it uses the canal system as like as a secondary overflow as well. So in really high storm events, it can overflow into the canal. And then on your question on the fencing, for us as landscape architects, it's, I think, like a really important part of what we do is connecting people with nature and allowing people to experience the ecology and the kind of the habitats and the landscapes that we design. And that's partly from an amenity perspective, but also I think if you have that connection with nature, then you respect it more and you start to appreciate it more, and it encourages people to be more sustainable and to kind of take more care. And so we had to work quite hard with Scottish Water to kind of come up with a strategy that allowed them to feel comfortable with the safety and the kind of risk management of the site, but also allow it to feel more open and more natural. Yeah.
On the issue of people sort of tarmacking over their front garden in order to park their car, and particularly with EVs, the price difference on public charging versus home charging, they're going to see more and more of that. Brings me to one of the things we've got a bit of a bugbear about, which is that at the moment, it really doesn't cost very much to apply to have a dropped curb if you want to tarmac over your garden. I think it's 200 quid, one off. On the other hand, if you have a residence parking permit, it's 60 quid, 100 quid every year, and you have to pay for your business parking. And so what we'd like to see is if somebody wants to apply for a drop curb, it should be significantly more than the residence parking permit cost, and there should be an annual charge, because otherwise it's not fair, because you're effectively privatizing a bit of the street by having a white line on your drop curb there and not allowing anybody else to park there so that you can get into your front garden or whatever. And it seems to me, I'm slightly waving my hands a bit here, that amongst the conditions for getting a drop curb would be that you have to use suds in paving it. And there's some very attractive systems. I guess they probably cost more than just bunging a whole load of surplus tarmac on it. But certainly in comparison to any of the other sort of attractive surfaces, I don't think there's a cost penalty putting in suds. If somebody's buying an EV, they're probably not doing it if they're penniless. And I think it could make quite a lot of money. I did once try to work it out, and there's many, I think tens of millions of quid potentially available if you looked at all the drop curbs in Cambridge that are in residence parking areas. Then you could probably make quite a bit.
So I'm gonna, yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were incentives and encouragement to depave? So if you have got rid of your front garden, what would be the incentives of putting it back? There's some wonderful things happening in the Netherlands and in Australia. People get very competitive about removing of slabs. So I think that would be a wonderful thing. Put the gardens back. So I'm going to talk to your point about the water butts. Yes, I think it's a wonderful idea to harvest rainwater, but it also really matters if people are using the rainwater once it's been harvested. If you've got a water butt and it's standing there full a lot of the time because your garden doesn't need to be watered, then it's not doing anything. It's not creating any flood resilience, and it's not doing any benefit for our drains. So one innovation, one thing that we've started doing more when we're doing rainwater harvesting installations for people is to put leaky water butts in. So you have a water butt, but it also has an overflow that is significantly lower than it would be. So you've got kind of maybe half the capacity that you would on a full water butt, but it empties and you don't have to think about. And it dribbles out, it doesn't overwhelm the drains. You can put it into a rain garden, you can put it into a pond, you can put it in other places for it to safely drain away. You can even put it back into the drain, but because it's kind of reduce the peak flow into the drains, then it's also creating flood. That's a really, really good and very cheap way of doing it. This has been very effective at stopping sewage overflows in the Isle of Wight, and it's sort of part of flood resilience. So I would love to see that. But also, if you wanted to have a policy for kind of new builds, having planters, having rain garden planters, you can have them very close to the to the property, but again it reduces the peak use of the drains, and so it kind of catches the first flush of the rain off of the roof, goes into it, and then kind of overflows somewhere safely. So that's also a really good idea, and they look beautiful too. A lot of residents really benefit having a place that they can sort of grow herbs very near the house, that they can just sort of pop out and kind of nip a few leaves off and go back inside. I have one in my back garden that's just like that. I don't want to go into the garden proper, but I just kind of nip out, with my slippers and sort of sniff a few bits of rosemary off, and great. So yeah, we can be more resilient, and you can have this integrated into building and retrofit. There we go.
Okay, and next, Councillor Karen Young.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I needed to leave 10 minutes ago. So I'm not going to ask a question. I will just say that I'm also a county councillor, and it's not my area of expertise, but it's not only the Denver sluice that's a problem in the Fens. The whole area is run by a whole set of pumps and sluices, and I can't remember the number now, but it's a huge number to replace them all. They were built like over 100 years ago, and it's something like 2 billion to get them put right and sort of restored for the future. And it's hugely concerning. So I was really interested in the discussions today. It was fascinating, but it's a huge, huge problem, and wholly agree with the idea that we all need to get involved and push for things to be done properly. And I loved all your interesting ideas about how to make us resilient. And I would love to hear, but I have to go, about, is there a possible scheme that we should be doing in Cambridge? Sort of landscape schemes there, really fascinating and look great. But sorry, I have to go.
Thanks for that. And we are aware there are other events happening. So if folks need to run off, that's understandable. But do you want to take a stab at answering the question? Or
Actually, if I just make a comment for Clara, although she's gone, unfortunately. The Trumpington Farm Company that own the land opposite Granchester Meadows, just immediately upstream of Cambridge, they would love, I mean, they've made their sort of wetland area now. They would have loved it to be in a much more serious flood prevention area. But apparently, for reasons that I'm completely puzzled about, they were not allowed to So if Cambridge wants to protect itself from river flooding, I suggest talking to the Pembertons and Trumpeton Farm Company about making the wetland there a bit wetter. No, it's actually Cambridge City because it's on the Trumpeton side of the river.
Okay. Okay, so thank you to the councillors for taking time to be with us tonight. We believe the future belongs to young people, and that in discussing the future of our city, it's important to hear the voices of young people. So we put out a call to local schools to ask if young people would like to come and tell us what's important to them. And unfortunately, we got no takers. So I'd like to open the floor to the youngest person in the room. If you would like to tell us what's important to you regarding flooding or resilience in general. Who's the youngest person? Okay, well, if anyone knows any young people who would like to come in future weeks to tell us about what's important to them, we would absolutely love to hear from them. So please know we have space in the agenda for that. Okay, we'll now move on to general Q&A. So the way this is going to work, please raise your hand if you have a question. Seats with mics, you can just press the button on the right, and then the mic and the camera will be on you. You can speak. If you don't have a mic, we have lots spare, so just come up and take one. If you don't want to speak, but do want to ask a question, feel free to write your question on a piece of paper, bring it to me, and I will ask your question for you. For people online, you can use the raise hand to ask your question or write it in the chat. And then please address your questions to a specific speaker and keep them focused on the issues that have been raised. And Charlie will run our Q&A.
Wonderful, thank you all so much. We just had one clarification point online, which was just about terminology. Which is, Clara, what does CSO stand for?
CSO stands for Combined Sewage Outflow.
Amazing, thank you, excellent. I would like to just come to another clarification point that two people picked up on, and someone in the room is kindly going to ask on our behalf, and that I'll pass.
Hi, I'm Jo. I'm an architect and I work on quite a lot of refurbishment of houses. And so it's my understanding, and I think it was pointed out online, that there is actually legislation that we can't tarmac and concrete front drives without permission, that we're supposed to be using permeable surfaces. So the question is it a question of enforcement and whether people are actually using the right materials, and then a follow-up, even though I will specify permeable, I don't really know how permeable, say, a key block that is designated permeable, and are there ways of sort of knowing what's a better surface? This is probably for Clara, but and might also.
Yes, there is, as far as I'm aware, there's not. Yes, you are supposed to have planning permission for impermeable surfaces over 5 meters. So basically a driveway, or you have a sustainable drainage system, you have suds, you have a place for water to go on your property. So yes, as far as I'm aware, there's not been enforcements, yeah, so yeah, it's kind of one of those sort of remarkable things. Like, so here is this legislation, how do we get to it being effective? But yeah, of course, when you move over to paving. There's lots of different ways of doing it. And just because you're using permeable blocks, it might not be installed properly. It might be embedded onto, you know, a cement and sand. There are many ways. And also you need to make sure that it retains its permeability. You need to maintain it. You need to, you know, make sure that water can still kind of go through it. So yeah, I mean, there are other materials that you can use, like that sort of matrixy, the eco block thing is also something that people do. You could have a driveway with a mesh in it that you can grow grass and moss and all kinds of things, but you can still, it still gives support for a car. There are lots of other ways of doing things, but you know, you could also you know, what I've seen also is like have a garden, but then you have kind of very isolate kind of strips that you drive onto. So yeah, there are many ways that you could have car parking in the front of your property, as well as the permeability that wouldn't require the maintenance that some things do.
I sympathise with the enforcement officers, because I think it must be very difficult to enforce, particularly you're also, because you have to go out the only time you're going to see that it's not working. Obviously, if you go out when it's pouring with rain, when it must be very tempting to decide you need a coffee instead. But one thing that occurs to me, that even if there was a specification for the permeability of the original material as installed, it depends a lot on what the slope is. And so if you're on a steep slope, the water's just going to rush off into the street, come what may. So as a specifier, it could be well worth thinking, well, when it clogs up or whatever, where is the surplus water going to go? And can you arrange a sort of mini rain garden next to the drive bit in order to protect the street? Or maybe it's a question of publicising the fact that you are not allowed to have impermeable drives. And then you will find people protesting that their next door neighbours have put in a new drive, which is now flooding their property with water sweeps down it. Get the sort of NIMBY factor to work in a positive way, perhaps.
And we'll just come over to Katie quickly for a comment.
Just for on enforcement, planning enforcement is a non-statutory service, so we don't get paid for that. So every time an enforcement officer goes to check whether it's a permeable surface or not, it would be taxpayers' money. So it doesn't happen because it goes into other enforcement, like affordable homes and things like that.
Fantastic. Thank you for those clarifications. We'll now come to some questions in the room. If there are any hands, please throw them up so I can sort of see who might have a question. This gentleman here, is anyone else? We'll come to this gentleman here, then we'll come to this lady, and then we'll take a question online.
Hello. I think this is a question for Anne, but there might be some input from others, and it has to do with permeability again. Having been on the front lines of the early 2000 floods by the river, my impression was at the time, and this is something that will get worse, I imagine, was that part of the problem wasn't so much the amount of rain that was falling, but the fact that there'd been a period of drought before. So the ground wasn't actually absorbing the water in time to basically make it manageable with the systems that were in place at that time. And I guess you had figures to show that this problem would actually increase in this kind of dry part of the country, which I think it still is, if there are long periods of drought before these massive downfalls come around.
Really, things aren't working in our favour. So on the one hand, if there's been a long period of drought, as we all see, the water, then you get a summer storm, more intense rainfall, and there does seem to be an increasing tendency for those intense summer storms because things are getting hotter, and the water just swishes off. It can't be absorbed quickly. And the ground needs to have a bit of sort of moisture in order to be able to act like a sponge. On the other hand, on the other extreme, in the winter, when the ground is completely and utterly saturated, was what we particularly saw in the winter of 23-24, when the groundwater level, the groundwater was basically at the surface. As Anglian Water were telling us, you know, if it's called a flood when the groundwater is above the surface, but if it's just below the surface, you don't see it, you don't call it a flood, but it's still actually flooding the infrastructure. And for example, that's why, you may remember that winter in, I think it was sort of January 2024, the A14 was closed. At least one lane of the A14 was closed near Newmarket for months. And that's because groundwater was coming out of the sort of embankment, and they just had to have trucks there pumping the water away. And that went on for, I think it was 3 or 4 months. It was only in June 24 that they actually were able to remove the emergency pumps from there. And it, of course, had a similar sort of problem in Bedford on the new southern bypass road that completely flooded. So you don't want it too dry and you don't want it too wet. You want it just right. So yeah, we all need, I think, to be very careful about what would happen if there was surface water flooding, because it can happen almost anywhere. I hope you weren't too badly affected in the 2001 floods.
Fantastic, thank you. And then we'll come to this lady here, her question.
Yeah, so what I notice is like Cambridge, as what you mentioned, is the urbanization have been growing and the city grew much bigger. And what I noticed, I grew up in Hong Kong and in the Asia country, I travel a lot, which is they are metropolitan compared with what I noticed here. It's mainly rely on like the garden to absorb the rainwater, and the rainwater drain, the hole is relatively small compared with the big city. So will it be possible to consider that some investment on the infrastructure so that to make the drain bigger, more powerful? Because I share one story with you, like Hong Kong is in the main street. They have suffering from flooding for more than 10 years. And once in the typhoon, you know, that there is very serious typhoon in all the summer. The flooding in the main street, it happened almost every month and lasts for more than 10 years. Eventually, the solution is they hire some expert to investigate the drainage, and then they do some improvement. Eventually, the whole problem is permanently fixed. I think that happened more than that problem, they permanently fixed more than 20 years. So this is one of the solutions, and I noticed the infrastructure here will be catered because it built hundreds of years ago for the Cambridge, the city planning. So maybe the city planning have is a time to revisit on this kind of infrastructure.
It's true. A lot of our infrastructure has been built for a different time. A lot of our infrastructure needs more maintenance, needs to be create more capacity. But there are also radical ways of thinking about and addressing the challenges that we have. You might have heard of a concept called sponge cities, which has come out of China, and I've forgotten the name of the guy who is brilliant. Unfortunately, he died quite recently, but he left us with a really brilliant idea of radically thinking about how do the cities respond to climate change, how do the cities respond to the growth and the huge volumes of water and those impermeable surfaces, making places for the water to go. So there are, maybe JJ will probably know more about sponge cities and this kind of radical kind of ways of kind of green, bringing green inside the cities, but also kind of creating wetlands and redirecting the water out of the drains. I don't think that the drains could ever be big enough, forever. Like it's good you can fix for a time, but drains will fail. Concrete will fail, infrastructure will fail. But if you work with nature and you start thinking about, oh, okay, we could have a wetland here. you know, we could redirect and start looking at how do we sort of address other challenges with water. We can do something, but I'm going to pass over to JJ because I think you'll be doing a much better job at talking about Sponge City.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I think I don't know what the solution is. I think the solution is multifaceted, and I think it needs to be quite radical in some ways, like a Sponge City, or we need to have, you know, big policy changes, and we need to make big kind of infrastructure moves, like some of the projects that I spoke about today. And it's about educating people as well, and people need to. If you look at, there's some really nice examples in Holland where they have these floodable landscapes, and they're, you know, public parks that flood, and, you know, quite big areas of public realm that flood during flood events, and that is, yeah, I guess it's partly an educational thing, and for people to understand that this is part of the process now, and this is part of the kind of natural cycle of our systems. So I think there's like really big infrastructure moves. I think, as Clara said, I think you could just keep making the drains bigger and bigger and the flood walls higher and higher. But I think the solution is bigger. You need to think bigger than that and more kind of integrated. And I also think these kind of small interventions, these cutting the curbs and the I think we need to approach it from kind of every scale. I think that's
One thing I'd like to see is when you look at the flood risk maps, obviously by the river is particularly high risk. And what have we got along the river in central Cambridge? We've got lots of cottages. And what have the cottages got? They've got these sort of large courtyards. And wouldn't it be wonderful if virtually all the cottages along the river actually had had lovely sort of swales and wetlands, you know, seasonal wetlands, you know, in their central courtyards. Quite how one makes it happen, I'm not quite sure, but I think it would be really cool. And in the same way, the colleges are doing a lot of investment in decarbonising. They could maybe do an awful lot to help improve water management. Maybe get them competing with each other for the best rain garden.
That's interestingly that one of the first slides I showed. We did an exercise last year where we mapped the public access to the edge of the river as it goes through the city, and it's quite an interesting process because you can see quite clearly the kind of vast lengths of the river that are owned by the colleges and aren't publicly accessible. So I think that's a really, yeah, I think that's part of Cambridge is the university and the colleges. I think harnessing that as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I should mention before we come back to questions is that we've had we topped out at 19 people, which is just a few under those in the room. So trying to give a good 50-50 split for those. I should mention that the report, for anyone that is interested, I know we've said before, but just a reminder that all the questions here will go into the report in some capacity. So do sort of get your comments in. And if anyone's interested, we have one person online who will contribute, and I'll pass that name on. We're going to go to a prepared question next, or rather one that was sent in advance, which I shall read out on their behalf. I think this is broadly to the panel, but I think it actually very neatly ties into what the panel have just been talking about. Is from Dr. Corrine Martins at the Centre for Sustainable Finance at CISL as part of the University of Cambridge. The question is, what role can financial institutions, considering banks, insurers and investors, play in scaling up the implementation of nature-based solutions to flood risk? Are there any interesting examples of private commercial capital being used for improving flood resilience? Any of the panel have an answer?
I think, but some of those radical solutions, like Quan Yu is the name of the guy from China, the landscape design architect who out with sponge cities. If we were to have Cambridge, any place, a sponge city, it would take a lot of investment. You know, we have you know, so much interest here economically. what would it be like if, we created bonds for the infrastructure that we needed? That could be invested a bit, I mean, that there is all kinds of ways of how do you get finance into these transitions that we know need to happen. You have BNG's biodiversity net gain, but how about flood resilience credits? What would it be like if teaming up, the council teamed up with some financial person to be able to kind of do the big vision, the big transition. I think that would be wonderful. I don't quite know how that would happen because I'm not a financial expert, but I think that would be wonderful.
I'm not a financial expert either, but I wonder if one possibility would be to use the biodiversity net gain credits, because I know, for example, the City Council is about to produce some new water courses on Sheep's Green, either side of Fen Causeway. And that's using biodiversity net gain water credits from some road scheme somewhere, I think that GCP, Greater Cambridge Partnership, has been involved in. And if they're potentially reducing some water-based habitats through some development, whether it's housing or a road or whatever, you then have to produce better water habitats somewhere else. So potentially, Sponge Cambridge, I wonder if you could set up a biodiversity net gain. That's a biodiversity net gain type project in order to get funding for it, but just an idea. And there's also there was a woodland carbon for planting trees. There is a carbon scheme, the woodland carbon credits. I don't know if there's one for peat restoration, but they ought to be, because peat is an even more effective way of sequestering carbon than trees. But though that of course might be something that's more relevant out of the fens than in the centre of Cambridge. You've got any ideas?
No, not. I think BNG is an interesting one, because I've noticed in my career as a landscape architect now that's become a mandatory planning condition. It's the developers or whoever's making the planning application is now incentivized, and landscape is getting more of a is becoming more important to them, which is great. So I think that's like the planning is an effective tool for that. I don't know if this answers the question, but it's interesting. I think it was an American initiative called iTree, but they've done it in London. I know they've done it carried out in Cambridge as well, but they're applying like a value to trees. So based on the kind of carbon sequestration, urban cooling, all the benefits that trees bring, they can apply a monetary value to them. So then that immediately helps in that side of things. So yeah, maybe if that's how they're thinking, maybe there's a way to do that as well with these types of landscapes and habitats.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will come. Oh, please, yes, Councillor. Sorry.
Just the caveat value of trees is really useful. We started using that in the city. The most useful thing insurers could do is every time they build a new house next to an old tree and there's subsidence, it is balance of probability for planning committee, and then the tree has to come down, or the council has to bear the cost of the root barrier. The most effective thing an insurance company could do is take into account the value of the tree and the fact they've insured it knowing it's next to a new house, or other new houses next to an old tree, because that has caused some frustration for me on planning committee, because the law is quite clear, it's a balance of probability, and then the tree goes, not the root, and the root barrier doesn't go in. So sorry, just wanted to add that, because you did ask what could insurance companies do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll come to another question online, and then we'll come to two more in the room. And we'll come with you first, then we'll come to another one. This is a question online. It's a bit multifaceted, so I'll have to read out and paraphrase. Thank you for your patience online. With all the past evidence and the current data around the risks, what are the councils going to do or are doing? And why have they not effectively or regularly prevented these incidences so far? I think the context of this question is sort of pointing out that the main measures should be taken for public areas, not just sort of leaving it to households and things. And the other part here is we don't necessarily need more plans. Instead, serious implementation, maintenance, and keeping up with technology like a lot of the rest of Europe. The other part here is about sort of people spend, or this person says that people spend years raising alert around potholes and streets and the real threat from city drivers, and obviously flooding plays into that to some degree. So I don't know if the panel or the councillor had a thought they could spare to that. Thank you.
So one requirement now in planning, I'm not sure when this came in, but a new development, regardless of its existing condition, has to meet greenfield runoff rates. So I think, as far as I understand, what that means is that if you have a plot of land that you're developing on, so say you're building a office building or whatever, the runoff rate of the surface water into the sewage system, into the drainage system, has to be the same as if it was a green field. So which is really interesting, because then you get these quite kind of overdeveloped plots having to attenuate a large volume of water on site. Now, a lot of the time, the solution is underground storage tanks, which helps with the kind of pressure on the drainage and satisfies that greenfield runoff requirement. But there are, I think there might be a way to take that further to for it to be a more natural solution, you know. And if this space would always push for a wetland or something that is that brings other benefits other than just the attenuation. But that is one way that it can be controlled.
I don't really know what the councils are doing, but I do believe that I've been told that one of the problems is if it's a residential development, the water treatment companies, as Anglian Water, have to connect. Even if they haven't got the capacity, they have no power to say, sorry, Mr. Developer, you can't connect. It just comes through, and hence potentially comes through into the river. But I believe that that's not the case for commercial developments. And so I see Katie looking dubious here. But anyhow, I'd been told that they had more power to impose restrictions on labs and offices and stuff like that. And so, slightly tongue-in-cheek, there's been occasions when we've responded to a planning consultation and said, well, the commercial bits of this, why don't you tell them that they can't have any sewage treated unless they treat it on site?
Certainly, I'm sure Katie will correct me if I'm wrong. So we've had a lot of issues with fresh water. One of the issues is, and until now, building regs insistence that all water in a house is potable. So it has to come. That, I think, is due to change very soon, because you can't have a rainwater flushing toilet in a house. We've got some really good exemplar stuff coming forward around the Science Park, for example, and CBC, where they are starting to manage all of their things on site. But the foul water has become a big issue recently with the Hartree works being stopped. So that means that we now have a holding objection for Anglian Water, who finally have started to object, having said they couldn't previously, to a lot. So we're having to impose a gramping condition, which means that we're basically saying you can build out, but by the time it's ready to be occupied, the officers, you have to have something in place. I have some concerns. The last thing we want is everyone building their own sewage works. I think that's probably not a sustainable solution. I think one thing that has been quite helpful recently, and I know Katie and all of us on planning committees have been pushing really hard, the water scarcity group, which is now also, we've got foul water covered as well, are really pushing hard. And one of the benefits of the Development Corporation potentially coming forward and the Cambridge Growth Company is they have really started intervening, because I think they've realised that we can't build what we want to build without these things. But it, as ever with planning, it's always, the local plan we're running on now is in 2018, so it's set up. We have a new emerging local plan, which I hope you all saw in consultation, incredibly high standards, I have to say. I think Katie and Bridget from South Council say it's probably the exemplar for the whole country. There are some risks to that coming forward with the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, which Katie and I were discussing the other night. If that comes through, it will almost drop to lowest common denominator. So we really need to fight in Cambridge to make sure we make a case for those exemptions. We have real water scarcity issues. We have foul water issues. We are, a lot of the developers are coming in well over above plan policy. So we've got one on the Science Park, I think, where they're quadrupling the size, but the water usage and foul water should be the same. because of the stuff they're managing. But the problem at the moment with residential is that we're struggling to bring that forward because of the potable water issues. But we also, for example, the new local plan wants to have drain pipes for every single flat with a water butt on the balcony. You know, little things like that, but that could make a huge difference for people either growing their own food in that kind of sustainable living, but also just reminding people not to use tap water. So there are, I think probably Cambridge is, Katie's nodding, I think we're pushing in the right direction, but there are still real issues, some of which are helped by planning and some of which are hindered. But I think the water companies, both Fowl and Fresh, are much more aware of this, and the water scarcity groups are really putting pressure on the government. You know, we have these kind of water credits coming forward, not quite nebulous at the moment. I've reserved my judgment on those, yeah. But, you know, those idea of the credits and offsetting, so you might retrofit a school before you're allowed to build houses that use that equivalent amount of water. But I have a watching brief on that, as I'm sure Katie does as well.
So we have a lot of skepticism about water credits for, yes, we'll send you a leaflet telling you to reduce the duration of your showers, and that will allow us to build a new house, because obviously you're going to save, you know.
I think we've been quite clear, we need to see it should be proven before, not afterwards.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We are on 10 minutes and we're going to do 2 questions in the room now, and then we'll come to 1 person on the line. If we keep answers briefer, we might be able to fit another one in. But of course, if not, that's no problem. So we've got one lady here, and would anyone else like to ask a question? Yes, so you two will come to the lady. Or please turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Mine is just a cautionary tale. We had money for planters in the road from Eddington, and the county worked on it, and it took us many, many years to get those in. And the idea of siphoning off the rain never was discussed. So we now have planters with trees. It's great, but I believe on Histon Road nearby, there are 1 or 2 cut curves, but really this needs to come from, well, it was from the county really that was designing it, but I've just put in a plea for that to be made more common knowledge and more available to, we were just a community group, and it took us 13 years to get those trees, but we, you know, could have been better. Thank you.
And go on, Clara, sorry, yes.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's also very much a thing. I mean, I think we're all learning, and it was very good having trees and very good having the planters, but you know, we know more now, and we know that we can think about water too. One of the things that we've been doing over the last year is you know, putting rainwater harvesting in you know, buildings that were by the council, where there's like a community gardens. You know, that was you know, one of the requirements for the developer to put a community garden. So we are working in Orchard Park, and there are 2 community gardens, but they did not think about water, which, you know, is need, if you're going to grow things in planters, you need to be able to put water in those planters, because it's not, you know, accessing the groundwater. So, you know, things get more complicated. So that's kind of what we're doing. But I think, you know, we have to kind of give people credit. Like there's kind of, you know, oh, okay, yes, where's the water coming from? You know, where's this, where's that? You know, it's just one of those things that once it's visible to you, you look at it as an opportunity, and you think, yes, as we start sort of moving and making places more green, and wouldn't it be wonderful if every low traffic neighborhood, you know, planter box would also think about the drainage. Every tree planting would also think about the drainage. You know, we could be doing this so much better. I don't think we can't sort of berate people for not having known, but it's what you do with the information that you have now moving forward. Is there something that you know, we could help with retrofitting? to move water into those areas. So, you know, it's all is not lost. I think that's kind of, it's with the new information, with the importance of water that we have here, and the, you know, creating more resilience for flooding too. All of these things are connected, and also kind of, you know, more evapotranspiration, more green covers, more low traffic neighborhoods. They're all things that we could be doing differently and better if we thought about all of those problems together.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I was going to raise something else, that homeowners of older homes, like us, you have an old home where all your water falling on your roof is discharged through your gutters into the street, which contributes to surface water flooding. If you redirect all your gutters instead into soakaways or water storage or some combination of those, then you do get a reduction in your water charges. It's not a lot, but you would be also really contributing to this reduction of surface flooding risk.
I think that's something that's well worth you know, making sure that people know about.
Thank you so much. Next, we will come to an online question. Francis, please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually perfectly timed because it's about gutter water. So I live in a 1950s house, and we're currently replacing the original concrete paths that were all around the house when it was built in 1950. And we discovered that all the water from the gutters goes into the gullies, and I had always assumed that the gullies just went into the drainage system. Actually, they all go to soakaways, and I was absolutely thrilled when I discovered that. And it just made me wonder whether, are there any regulations around new builds for houses that roof water from gullies should go into soakaways rather than drains, or is it just what people feel like doing when they build the house, or what is the situation with that?
Yeah. So it's as Tom mentioned, that if new houses are designed for soakaways, or even water containers maybe underground, which is part of a recycling system, which you can have in a private home. If it's not connected into the drain system, your water bills is reduced, but there is an assumption that it is going into the mains drainage system, and therefore it automatically, you get a percentage added onto your bill unless it's designed not to go into the mains water. So yours doesn't go into the mains water, so you could ask if you could have a reduction on your bill. And if you're doing renovations, you might be able to put in an underground tank to collect that water, and you can recycle it and use it for toilets, or if it's filtered adequately, for showers or washing dishwashers and things like that, where it's being done very successfully in the city in many places.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any regulations for new builds? It seems like a no-brainer to have soakaways.
Yes, there are regulations about all of the drainage systems, and it's often it is to do with mass building is mainly based on, most of what happens is based on the cost, and it is what is cheapest to do. So I don't know of any mass building companies who put in recycling systems. So, but there may. These days, quite often, you might put in a storage tank which overflows, but then into the main system. So, but it is possible to design. So the building regulations set it all out. So you can just have soakaways, or you can connect into the main drainage.
Thank you.
One thing I just perhaps to point out is that it's really important that your drains are connected to the right sort of drains, because what should happen is that the water that comes down from your gutters goes down one way or another into the surface water drains and joins with the water that comes off the street, and then it will flow into your nearest river. And on the other hand, the stuff that comes out of your toilet, your dishwasher, your sink should go down the foul sewer, down the big soil pipe that probably goes down the outside of your house, and that heads off to the sewage works. What builders sometimes do is take a shortcut. So do check if you had, or your predecessors in your house had a loft extension done or a garden studio or something like that. You can quite often, in some cases it's 15% of the time, find that the pipes have been connected up just to whatever was nearest and most handy. And either that means that your rainwater then flows straight through the sewage works, and starts flooding that, or even worse, your toilet is plumbed into what should be surface water and then flows out into the river. And there's definitely some misconnections that are contributing to the problems at Sheep's Green. So do just have a look at your pipes and see if it looks sensible. And if it doesn't, get Anglian Water to come along and check it out, which they'll do for free.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will be handing back to Helen for some final little bits.
Great, thanks, Charlie. So if you have any questions we haven't had a chance to get to, please write them down and leave them with us. All the questions will go into the report, and we will make an effort to get those questions answered for you in the report. Even if you think of questions tomorrow that you want to ask or later, just send them to me. My email address is in the Eventbrite invitation. So tonight, our designated listener has been Alison Hoare, and she will now give a 2-minute wrap up of all of what we've heard tonight.
Great, thanks, Helen. Yes, it's been really interesting evening and discussion, full of lots of interesting information, some of it somewhat alarming. With many people already facing flooding, and the risks of those are only going to increase as we've heard. But I have actually come out of the discussion feeling quite positive, because there's clearly a huge amount that can be done and is already being done, from the very local individual level right up through sort of development scale through to broader regional level actions. So thinking about, I guess, some of the things that can be done and some of the themes that came out. There were 4 key themes that jumped out at me. I think the first of those is that there's a real need to be proactive and to think about these risks up front, so that in new developments, there's the design is being thought about right at the start, whether that's the drainage system or whether it's simply planting trees. So yeah, it's thinking about these risks right at the very beginning and as early as possible. Second theme was the importance of nature. Too often discussions about water and flooding are about all the grey infrastructure, which, as was pointed out, is super important, but nature can play a huge role in helping to address some of these risks and improve resilience. A third theme, which I think would perhaps be interesting to explore more, is around finance. I think, again, often thinking about flooding, we think about regulations and how to prevent harmful developments, but we also need to think about how to encourage water positive developments and incentivize developers to do the right things and individuals to do the right thing as well. And then the fourth theme I picked out was that about education and raising awareness. And I think and hope that this meeting is part of that process.
Thank you, Alison. That was brilliant. Okay, so we are close to wrapping up. I just have some concluding remarks here. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to the counselors. Thank you to all the volunteers who have helped make this possible. Thank you to Katie for all of your organizing work. Thank you to the council for letting us have this space for free. And thank you to the Cambridge Room and the Resilience Web for your support in making all of this possible. So after tonight, we will send a link to the recording. I am happy to say we now have the link, the recordings from the first two events online. So I'll send around a link to those in the morning tomorrow. Our next event will be on March 12th, and that will be on energy. We encourage community groups to attend, and we have space on the balcony to distribute flyers. So tonight we have some materials from Water Sensitive Cambridge and Carbon Neutral Cambridge. So take a look at those on your way out. Yes, so if you're not on the Resilience Web, check out the Resilience Web. There's some flyers around here, which actually don't have the Resilience Web link on them.
There's some in the lobby.
So that's funny. There's some outside. So take those with you. Check it out. If you have a group that's not on there, please add yourself. Also visit the Cambridge Room in the Grafton Centre. There'll be an event there next week, next Wednesday, about the Cambridge Development Corporation, which should be very interesting. So this event has been produced on essentially zero budget. If you would like to make a donation, it would be very gratefully received to help us cover our printing and advertising costs. Donations can be made in the basket outside. We have a QR code, and which is also on here. That one made it on the flyers. Or you can just leave cash in the basket. What happens next, right? So following on from this series, we would love to host more in-depth workshops on solutions. For this, we will need funding. But if you are interested in sponsoring further work in this area, then please talk to me or Katie afterwards. So thank you all for coming. Do visit the stalls outside. And please let's continue the conversation on the balcony so that the staff who are working late here can clean up and get home. Good night, everyone.
So the front door is now locked. So, but there are side entrances. Both side entrances are open. So if you go out this door, left and left again, and then there's a stairwell down. Thanks.